Hello and welcome to our show. We have an awesome show today with a wealth of knowledge, brother and sister, John and Ashley Quint will be joining us today. And they have some great story, great background and history. And stay tuned. We have Christian Palmer on my right and Linda Stevens on my left. So here we are. Welcome, John and Ashley.
Thanks for having us.
So, Ashley, you and I have had the fortune to meet you personally there in Columbus, Ohio, and you have such a long, extensive history, as does your brother, John. So, John, you trained with Louis Simmons. Well, you both have great mentors. So, Ashley, Charlie Poliquin, correct?
Charles Poliquin, yep.
Yeah, Poliquin. And then John, Louis Simmons?
Yeah.
So Ashley, tell us a little bit about, your channel is awesome, by the way. You have these great guests on there offering tremendous information and content. So Ashley has an awesome channel on Muscle and Fitness Plus. You can go to muscleandfitness.com, click on Muscle and Fitness Plus, and check her out. Uplift yourself with Ashley. So Ashley, just share with our listeners and our viewers a little bit about your background.
My background started in 2004. My brother and I both were attending Otterbein College at the time, and I decided to not play college softball and take an opportunity to go to Arizona and mentor under Charles Poliquin. And he was a world-renowned strength and conditioning coach. And at the time, my brother was playing college football. And so we both kind of we worked out together when we could. And I decided more to go into the realm of exercise science. That wasn't initially what I was going to go into. But when John was a freshman and I was a junior, it kind of we took a different direction and went into the exercise science field. And basically, my life kind of took off after I met Charles in the spring and started working for him. And then basically, it's I think everything just kind of life since then, we've been living in a gym. I've been, at least. And so John decided to go into exercise science as well. And I think more just through our individual interests, we've kind of just ended up complementing each other with different avenues that we both have found fascinating in the exercise science realm. So I think mine's more been in the gym. John has been in the gym, but also extensively working on, rehabbing and getting people to transition functionally back into a gym if they've had injury. And so we've just kind of evolved as the industry has evolved, I would say.
You work with many professional athletes as well, and I know now that one of the main population is basketball players.
Right now, I'm more geared towards working with high school, college, doing semi-pro basketball players. I did go for quite some time. I stepped away from doing, after I moved out of Arizona, I would say, I kind of stepped away from doing the Olympic athletes, and I moved to Connecticut, and then I was more tied into the NHL. And then when I moved back home to Columbus, I kind of transitioned and went towards, I hate saying this part, but a different interest that was a lot more challenging for me, which was learning more about medical and going the route if somebody ended up having cancer or somebody ended up having a severe injury, something that may have lost a function of their body. And I really started diving more into the medical and wanting to work with doctors and trying to rehab people so that they would be able to get their life back. That seemed to be more of a challenge for me, to where athletes seemed to be easy. It was because they were consistent. We could obtain goals a lot easier. And that just kind of as fun as it is, I needed more of a drive and a challenge mentally. And kind of went that direction. And I think the other is just that, having kids and having, interests that your children may end up having has also like kind of dove me into the realm of basketball right now, and working with a lot of different athletes at different ages and different demographics, and, just kind of enjoying what I'm doing right now versus it being such like a high demand.
How close are both of you together? How close, facility wise, your gyms? Do you have gyms both close together or nearby, or facilities?
Yeah. I treat people out of a home office. So I actually work out of my home, and then which is down the road from here. And then I utilize Westside Barbell as a facility.
What a great history there, Westside Barbell. Louis Simmons, Westside Barbell. And I do love your shirt, John. Weak things break. As I look at this, how tall are you?
About 5'10".
5'10", and then what position you play in football?
I play defensive end.
Defensive end, great position. As we see, weak things do break. So with
we are like 5 minutes apart. I mean, basically, it's like where my gym is and where he works and treats people, it's 5 minutes away. And then Westside Barbell would be like 15, 20 minutes, depending upon traffic. So, I mean, we're all just within like a same, area of each other.
It's an incredible history, between, of course, your college background, your degrees and everything else. But on top of that, the individuals that you've come across that act as mentors. And then I saw that, John, so you rehabbed Louis Simmons. I see that he injured himself and you rehabbed him back. Was that?
Yeah. So I met Louis Simmons in 2011. We met. At the time I was competing in bodybuilding, but I trained with another member from Westside, George Halbert. And so I was introduced, and George had a issue with the shoulder joint, specifically supraspinatus. And so I did work with him, and then based off of that, that's how I met Louis Simmons, essentially, I think right around 2011. And then ever since then, I've been there in different capacities as far as, actually training there. But then also I've done work with Louis Simmons in regards to some of his books, so Special Strength Development for All Sports. I was able to write a piece in there, and then just continue to try to, push the West Side system is essentially, the conjugate method, right? So essentially, everyone at West Side has a goal of trying to push the conjugate method and kind of probe the boundaries of human performance and strength, utilizing that.
Yeah. So you mentioned neuromuscular therapy. So many don't know what that is. So explain that a little bit. And then before we go on to that, the supraspinatus with Louis, was that a tear? What happened with the supraspinatus there?
Yeah. So unfortunately, George Halbert, he's a very humble individual, but at one point in time, he was no doubt the greatest bench presser in the world. And unfortunately, injured his supraspinatus, had a re-injury of it.
Was it surgery involved or no?
Yeah.
Surgery involved, then you helped that recovery process, the rehab.
Yeah, and then once he got to the point where he was training, I was training for bodybuilding, which is primarily muscular hypertrophy. And where those guys really excelled at was obviously developing strength. And that was something that, was kind of a blind spot. So I was able to learn a lot from training with those guys because it was completely different. And then kind of the rest of the system.
All right, so that brings me to that question I asked earlier. So neuromuscular therapy, and this, of course, you can find a lot of information on Ashley's channel. Ashley, you're a rock star. That channel is awesome, and very much looking forward to seeing you at the conference. So as I mentioned earlier, Christian on my right, Linda here, they'll both be at the conference too. John, are you going to be down there? Are you going to be there as well at the A4M conference?
No, unfortunately, I won't be able to make it.
Well, so I won't be able to meet you, but look forward to seeing you, Ashley. So neuromuscular therapy.
Yeah, so I'll try to compress this as much as possible. So I'm a neuromuscular therapist. That's the medical license that I practice under. I don't really use neuromuscular therapy. in the way that it was, I guess, essentially, it was taught to me. What I use is something that's called the internal strength model. And so I'll try to simplify this. Individuals reach out to me that don't have the requisite physical capacity to meet the physical demands. This has either created a plateau or an injury. And so what I do is I utilize treatment and training to increase their physical capacity so that they're at a better match with the physical demands that they have, whatever those physical demands are.
So, Linda and Christian, are you familiar with neuromuscular therapy?
I have heard about it, not in depth, but I am familiar.
Linda?
I've definitely heard about it, but I'm not versed in it the way.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And John, you travel the world. You lectures with other of your peers, doing seminars or lectures and speaking, correct?
So essentially, a couple years ago, I guess what we're trying to do is kind of blur the lines between treatment and training, where a lot of individuals that show up that they want treatment, really what they need is training, right? A lot of times, treatment will be given out, but it's not technically what the individual wants. It's what they think they want, but it's not what they need. So essentially what we did was we created a model that practitioners can use, whether that be a strength coach, chiro, physical therapist, doctor, whoever, but we have a model that when somebody comes to them with an issue, they can figure out what the issue is and then use that model to figure out training solutions that are going to match what that individual actually needs to increase their physical capacity.
And that ties right into, what we're really working with A4M, as Ashley, you and I discussed in the past. Go ahead.
So, a question, John, now how can neuromuscular therapy complement pre-existing strength training programs? Like, how can you integrate them to make it a more effective protocol for said individual?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess the way that I conceptually think about it is when somebody goes to do strength training, right? And maybe we'll put more context into this, into an environment that I work in. When you're working with guys and females too at Westside Barbell, right? They're pushing the boundaries of external strength training, right? They're trying to get everything out of their bodies to essentially acquire a new all-time world record. And so where neuromuscular therapy, or more specifically internal strength training with live, is as they're running the conjugate method, which means they're running max effort, dynamic effort, repeated effort, that's the system that Louis essentially developed, that Westside continues to develop. Well, they're utilizing that system. What's going to happen is they're going to specifically adapt to whatever exercise selection. As they adapt to that exercise selection, it's going to have negative consequences. This is something that Lou kind of also brought to the foresight. It's called biological accommodation. So a simple example is you got a lifter, they're trying to reach an all-time world record of squat. They're going to use special exercises in the squat to build that up. As they utilize those exercises, their hip is going to get better at squatting, but their hip squats, but their hip is going to decrease in the amount of range of motion they have. That's kind of the case of what happened with George. As range of motion in a joint decreases and external loading increases, now what we're going to have is the recipe for an injury. So how it complements it is, as these individuals are pushing their external strength training, that's training with specific aim to increase external performance, the internal system is going to start to contract to give you the output, but we don't want a contraction. That's biological accommodation. So we use internal strength training to starve off that accommodation so that they don't have a decrease in hip joint range of motion, which would then decrease the amount of muscle tissue they have access to generate force to get stronger. So we run the two essentially in parallel with each other so that we get cumulative multifaceted effects at the internal level, but then also at the external level.
Okay. Very interesting.
Are you none of your clients, are they using stem cell or PRP at all?
I've had clients that do PRP. I think, look at it kind of like this. I think it's one of those things where we have so many different modalities that we can end up applying. It's about knowing how to utilize what is all out there and knowing when to use it so that it actually works. Because in our industry, we see it's kind of like we're on different spectrums. Like I could be more with the young athletes, high school athlete, college athlete, who at the college level, dependent on where they're going and playing, they may have a college strength training program, but that's not hitting their individual need. And then you're also working with, does that kid have something that's pre-existing? And so if they don't, for instance, end up having those things, we can say, well, maybe this kid needs to have a stretching protocol or mobility protocol or healing protocol there. If that doesn't work, then maybe we need to work with a doctor that can end up doing, peptides and or PRP. And then we basically are saying this is open and available, and we know how to utilize all these things to a vast array of clients that can be young, they can be old, dependent on it. Like, for instance, my daughter, what was it, this past January, she tore her ATFL. Immediately knew that it was her ATFL, call Dr. Gearman, take her on out. She does the PRP. We go through different types of training to get her transitioned back into playing. She's working with her uncle. I'm getting her on, another end, because it was a freak accident that just ended up happening upon landing. And it's just knowing how to use different forms of, training, stretching, different modalities, if it be with medical or medical practitioners. It's just knowing how to use this and how to integrate it so that it's quick, it's efficient, you can identify things quickly, and you can end up making the best utilization of this so that it works. That's kind of how I think all of this works with how we do our job.
That's a fair question.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, Ashley, nice to meet you. So
Nice to meet you too.
how old is your daughter?
My daughter just turned 15.
Okay, so she's in high school.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting to me to hear you talk about that, because my daughter's almost 19. She's a college freshman playing basketball. And
Oh,
so I'm always curious your thoughts around like the strength training and the conditioning of some of these schools. If you think, how good do you think they are? I know in high school it was, not to throw shade on anyone, but sometimes some of the things she would come home and say, and I'm like, all right, but I'm curious your thoughts around what you think the strength training and conditioning programs are like at school. She's at a D3 school.
We're seeing that face.
Well, I just, because
Saying it without saying it.
it's a great question. I don't even know if I want to answer it.
You're saying it sucks.
just
It's hard. I'm Fisher behind me. He's at all the basketball games. He does our videoing, and he kind of knows.
By the way, just on that note, Ashley, I just want to thank Fisher, who at Fisher 5 Photography and Film. We'll talk more about them in a minute, but their quality of work that they put on your channel. I know that they take care of your video production there. So Maurice and your team, shout out to you, and thank you very much for your sponsorship. Fisher 5 will give you all that information coming soon. Okay, so Ashley, sorry to interrupt there, Linda.
No, you're fine. So that is such a great question. I will give you my opinion, but I actually have a really good point that my brother and I spoke of about a couple weeks ago when we were with Mom and we were getting tea. And I want you to say that because I did mention that to Rob at one point. But I'm not thrilled. I'll be honest with you. I'm not thrilled with what goes on with high school sports, and I'm not thrilled with what goes on with college sports. I think that there's a lot of underdeveloped coaches and coaches that just put kids through a program randomly as though it's, and I hate saying physical education as well, but I don't think that they know how to individually look at a child and be able to assess a child based off of where they are strength and weakness based. So with that being said, a lot of kids don't actually need strength training right off the bat. They actually need to have function and mobility in order to know how to then gain in strength. And a lot of that is eliminated, and kids just get thrown into a gym. They start training and they think that it's all the numbers off the PRs that, make it. And so for me as a mom, it has been extremely challenging because I have to talk to my daughter as I talk to these kids I have, and I have to say, you're on a team, and going to all your lifting and doing that is an activity. Despite the fact that it's a sport, I have to say that's an activity. And your demand then is that you individually have to put in the work aside from what is being asked of you, and you're needing to end up doing your individual work to make yourself stronger, to prevent an injury, to keep yourself in a season, if that is all year round based on how these kids are doing it now, or if that is just, for a 4 to 5 month time block before you transition into then, if it's a different AAU or something of that sort. So I have found with basketball players, they are the most consistent on a yearly basis for being able to go from taking a 3-month time period off, going into preseason, going into season, transitioning out of, if it's 2 to 4 weeks of being kind of an off season into then an AAU, into then, national teams and things like that. So basketball is definitely the most consistent sport, but it is a different type of a kid, I think, that I work with. Just, football is something where you have your preparation time, your 10 weeks, maybe additional. It's just a different sport with different types of dynamics. So with that being said, the most fascinating part about what my brother does is that when he goes and ends up lecturing at different colleges, universities, or whatever, his conversation that he had with me a couple weeks back was talking about the actual university model as far as with injury prevention. So why don't you explain that to them? Because I think this is the most fascinating thing when it comes to college sports and what parents don't know about, where do you send your kid? And if they get injured, what is that rehab process going to actually look like as a parent, as well as knowing, what does my kid need to do in preparation for? And should this be something that is considered, wherever your child ends up going and playing a college sport? So
yeah, John, I would definitely want to hear more about injury prevention there.
Yeah, so let me see. So there's different. So to give you guys more context, I work with a lot of strength coaches, specifically in football. And depending on what university these coaches are in, they either have a performance model or they have a medical, right? But it's a lot of times what happens when the football coach, and this is specifically the strength coach, when the structure is set up as a medical model, the strength coach is really constrained in a limited way, meaning that everything has to go through that medical department, which a lot of people may think
very challenging. That's very challenging.
And an athlete may not be able to rehabilitate with a performance strength coach at the rate that the medical staff. You have a discrepancy upon that. That's probably the biggest challenge with this.
Yeah, and so essentially what you have, and this is a trend that I always tell strength coaches that I work with, right? If you think about your local university, right? And you think about, here we're at Ohio State. And if you look at Ohio State, the same athletic training staff, the head of that staff is there, but there's been 3 changes in strength coaches, right? So the strength coach has a very hard job to do, because that strength coach is going to have to, they're going to be hamstrung by the medical staff, but the medical staff is going to be doing, let's say, more passive modalities like ultrasound, ice, all this stuff, which is great, right? But if we really break it back down to why an athlete can't compete or can't train to compete, right? It's because they don't have the requisite physical demand. So they're going to have to do some sort of work that changes that. And unfortunately, passive modalities like foam rolling and all this stuff that we see permeate through, I guess, a lot of these institutions, they're not going to get that athlete back to that same point, right? And, if you saw it from my perspective, it would be the same thing. You see this with higher level athletes too. If you look at Odell Beckham Jr. As an example, he's torn his ACL twice, right? And these are high level individuals that have no financial constraints to rehabilitation, right? If you look at someone like Taylor LeBron, who's probably one of the top left tackles, he now can't play because of being in that same issue. But to kind of circle it back in, I feel like strength coaches have a very difficult job in what they have to do. The good part about that is now you start to see strength coaches getting paid appropriately what they should be getting paid. It's raising a lot of eyebrows, but that's how important the strength coach is. The problem though is, like everybody's kind of stated here, is the strength coach's job should be to physically develop that individual. And if that individual is injured, they actually need more physical development because they're not even in a physical state where they can compete with their peers, right? And so that's kind of what I see from my perspective.
Right. And that's probably, Linda, what you maybe have seen or have not seen is that, like, do you know high school strength and conditioning staff that is assessing all these athletes from performance, standpoint, you're really never seeing that. And even if you go to Division III, they're going to have the coach probably, or the head athletic trainer is going to be in charge, or an assistant coach is going to be in charge of a strength training program, which is the same program every year, keeping a kid active, not going off of, if I have this athlete who is a basketball player and I need to increase upon their vertical, or I need to get them to be able to have a wider, be bigger in the post, right? Know how to shuffle, bend more appropriately. They're not doing the steps that are necessary because when they don't know, and maybe that university doesn't end up having a strength coach, but they're saying that they have an athletic trainer that is, going to be able to help them with rehabilitation. This is where it's kind of like you got to go beyond the limit and be able to educate people enough to say, that's great that you have that, but now if you're at that school or university or college, you need to do your individual prep work in order to either keep the demand, the direction that you need, or increase the performance of that athlete. And that's the frustrating part, is that, like, from our side looking at it, we didn't end up having those things. And these are things that now, as we've been immersed, and I've seen, Charles Pollock and train Olympic athletes, and John seen world record holders with, Westside Barbell, we've seen at such a high demand and a high limit as to pushing these boundaries of strength, that there is such a deficit when it comes to general population or just parents just wanting their kids to be able to excel. You see, and coaches that are coaching, that they are volunteering their time, but they don't have the wealth to know what to do to implement to actually preserve these athletes and to make them better, doing things that aren't just wearing and tearing them down. It's actually developing them so that their performance rate is only going to keep accelerating higher. And that's kind of like where the frustration part can end up lying, for him or I, because there is so much more to all of this than just what meets the eye, watching an athlete produce,
Yeah. So to bring up a point to what you, John, and Ashley have said, something that I've noticed over the course of, even thinking back to when I played football in high school, and then looking at different athletes that I know in the communities that I work in, seeing the strength and conditioning programs, or if you want to call it that are delivered to the kids, a lot of these coaches, to your guys' point, are very undereducated. And a lot of them look at, hey, we're just going to run them and gas them, right? That's the way to get them in shape. Or let's just get them under the squat bar, just get them moving the weight. It doesn't really matter so much how it looks. Versus, I do see some strength and conditioning, more so in college, start to incorporate things like functional range conditioning, FRC, or different methods of making sure these kids can absorb their own force, change direction, create better elasticity in their tissue. And I noticed that more so in high school, there's a huge demand for better quality coaches. Do you feel like there's an improving trend in the quality of coaches in high schools? Specifically, because I noticed there's, at least in my experience, there's lesser quality coaches in high school. And arguably, that's even a more important time because these kids are still in their developmental stages, developing their habits of how they can move their body, maintaining mobility in combination with strength. Do you feel like there's much progress being made in delivering better programs to high school athletes?
Well, I'll say it like this. I work with a gentleman, Cody Ballard, who's a semi-pro. He played professional basketball, and there's kind of this niche that I've learned with basketball. It's that, and our father's been a basketball coach for like 45 years, and he is now coaching my daughter with her elite AAU team. And the biggest thing that I've noticed is that there is skill, and then there is coaching. And when you have the skill of the sport, you never, from a strength perspective, you never want to take away from the kids' skill development. And when you end up having then the strength part, you need to know how to assess a kid in such a way that they're able to continue to keep advancing, but you're never stepping foot on the coach that then is performing the skill, meaning teaching the skill. And I don't think that there is enough coaches that complement each other. And because I think people are more in competition with each other versus realizing that this is an opportunity where if you have a unit and a group of people working together, you can advance this in ways that you can't even imagine. So I think the issue stems from, in my opinion, is that there are athletic directors that don't really understand all of the things that they need when knowing how to develop an athletic program. That's what I think it comes down to, because as an athletic director, you have to understand it's a business, but outside of it just being a business, there is still there are needs within that business that need met per sport. Not all sports may meet everything, but there are things that you do need. And so it's looking at it from, if I were to take, certain athletes, you made the comment, the FRCs, yeah, those are great. And it's good to end up having those tools as modalities that can either be implemented in or you've always utilized, because I know that FRCs do that with different football programs, right? I mean, so that can be done in all strength training programs across the board, but you have to have somebody on the staff that is maybe doing that. So it could be an athletic trainer. It also could be the strength coach. It could also be the football coach that may need to implement that to other programs as well. It's that everybody has to start to learn that there are niches, and you have to almost pair up with certain niches in order to know how to integrate these to become a performance staff. And I think that's the key to this, is that there are so many niches that people need to kind of expand their mind and welcome. If I have this kid, this athlete, how do I make them better with this strength coach, with this person here, with that person there? Because I may utilize them all. You can always use a chiropractor, an acupuncturist, neuromuscular therapist, FRC, a strength coach. I mean, you kind of need them all, but you need to know how to integrate them so that they are utilized in the best direction forward. So I don't think that high schools are even on the brink of having understanding nor development, especially, sadly, if physical education is being taken out. And I am dealing with kids on my end that don't know how to jump rope or don't know how to end up bending or using their body. And sadly, COVID put a big dent in that, where basic functional skills that us and you guys would end up having, that is not in this lower population of children. And everything is tap, or, you're doing stuff off of instances, you're not doing stuff off of basic biomechanics, because people don't know maybe how to watch. It's almost turned into a lost art in a sense, some of it.
So there's a question for John. Now, how has developing the internal strength model with Dr. Spina and Shivers helped in making athletes in Gen Pop with less with less injury, increase their mobility and preserve their function? How is it integrated all those things?
That's a great question. So essentially what the internal model does, the internal strength model, has a very specific aim. And the aim is to elicit stimulating training effects at the joint space level, at the connective tissue level, at the muscle tissue level. And the reason for that, and part of the byproduct of doing that, is you'll get increased neuromuscular control as well. How that's going to help, right, is you guys were just discussing strength coaches and the issue of developing kids or really any athletic demographic, right? Well, what this does is and this would be maybe an interesting thought experiment to have, right? If you wanted to improve athletic outcomes, if you're a high school athletic director and you wanted to improve athletic outcomes across all sports, really, in my opinion, I could be wrong, the main thing that you would do is you would hire a very good strength coach that can physically develop the kids. If the kids can get physically developed, specifically in areas of joint space, connective tissue architecture, connective tissue load bearing capacity, you're going to mitigate injury. Okay, this is how it got integrated into West Side Barbell. If you think about how much training over time it takes to attain an all-time world record. Okay, well, if you get injured before you can attain the all-time world record, that you're going to get injured at a joint level or a connective tissue level. So enter in the internal strength model to start that off, so that now we can start to pick off more titles. We can have our athletes succeed at the level of competition much better than athletes not running this model, right? But to get back to the original question, what it's going to do is it's going to develop like what internal strength training does. It looks up, it views strength as an emergent behavior of an athlete that's generated by this biological organism that is the athlete, and it's specifically doing training work to improve the physical state of that organism, so that then when they go to play a sport and the sport coach goes to ask them to demonstrate a golf swing, they have the physical capability to take in the instruction so that they can start to learn. If you look at where a lot of skill acquisition gets constrained from a limited perspective, what's happening is the sport coach is asking the athlete or the individual to do something that they don't have the requisite physical capacity to do, which means that they have to do specific physical training in parallel with their training, right? So if we wanted to develop, if you want to make coaches look really good, right? Sport coaches, you're a high school football coach, you want to make your sport coach look good, give him athletes that he has that have the physical capacity to be doing what they're trying to teach them to do from a skill acquisition standpoint. So that's what the internal strength model does, is it essentially constrains training work at the internal level with a specific aim and intent to increase those areas. And by increasing those areas, the emergent behaviors that come from that individual are going to start to jump. And then and then on the back end, when you have elite level athletes that are generating these emergent behaviors with their high levels of performance, we then use the internal strength model to sustain the physical state that athlete's in, so that then we can get compounding effects to hopefully over time attain sport mastery, which is the goal.
So I mean, the point of like even you asking the question is that like one of the biggest interesting facts that they've ended up being able to do over here at Westside, integrating all this stuff, is that they had athletes, like was it hunters and kickers, they were able to come back after being able to integrate this on their level back into the NFL. And that's kind of where when you start to look at how this can be properly integrated in, it's preserving that human, that person, the athlete, but it's then increasing where their performance is so that they can continually try to keep doing it and doing it and doing it again, but they're not overtraining and overexerting themselves, which is in hindsight the model that we're all accustomed to doing and what we're used to seeing. And so that kind of makes it, kind of explains it in another facet of being able to look at it, so it can be applicable to what you're interested in.
Okay, got it.
Incredible.
That makes sense.
Ashley, I wanted to ask you also, you mentioned that you're working more on the medical side now, helping people. Do you incorporate any kind of nutritional advice or supplemental advice, or do you look at blood work or any of those factors when it comes into helping people that are trying to rehab or get better?
So everyone here at Uplift would be more of an individual. So everybody is kind of like has their own individual protocol based off what their need is. So I could end up having people, I work with Dr. Morrison at the Morrison Center in New York City. And so I have a lot of my general population clients that end up doing, every 3-month lab work. So we're looking at lab diagnostics and looking to see, should we end up being able to integrate? Do we have to integrate a different type of training based off what the lab work is saying? Is there supplements that need to get integrated? Could there be peptides? Could there end up being hormones? Looking at it from a full facet. So sadly, I would say that a lot of people know in hindsight somewhat how to nutritionally eat. It's just a lot more specific data that we end up maybe doing. So for instance, if someone has adrenal fatigue, they're maybe modifying their nutrition protocol to end up getting themselves out of a chronic state back into what an optimal state. So that could be nutrition. It could also be different supplements integrated at different times, or it maybe is taking, stepping back upon their training, integrating more, parasympathetic health that they may end up needing. There's just so many modalities. So to answer that, I do work on the medical side, and I work with different physicians working on a multitude of things. So I've had breast cancer patients, different types of various estrogen cancer patients, I would say. I work with my best friend. She's in the command center over at Ohio Health here. And so I've been very fortunate to work with different types of clients that also, they may have a physician that is over at Ohio Health. And let's say Ohio Health wants to implement something or be looked at nationally to be able to offer something to additional patients. So if they end up as a client or a patient having good threshold as to what the actual physician, if that is with surgery, if that is with rehab, if it's with whatever, there's kind of like this little model where we want to just keep health and keep that patient's health at that optimal level. So we kind of pair people up together, we can kind of help even on another end of the health realm of trying to improve upon, overall health, in a medical side, as well as then how does that translate over to then sports performance side. So there's just, I guess how the best way I can say this is that it's endless. All these things are endless. It is constant. You can reinvent a wheel, but the reality is just there's a multitude of different opportunities that continue to keep coming up, that if you are educated enough, know how to utilize the network of people that you, one, trust, two, that are educated, and three, that are willing to also quite possibly experiment with things, as well as, being open and saying, I want to learn about this. Are you willing to also learn in this process so that we can end up being able to transition and push a different realm? The health industry, I really think that it's kind of like there's no end to learning and there's no end to how to integrate all of this. So everything that we've talked about at all realms, I think that we're either educated, continuing our education on this, as well as getting with other people in this industry, networking with them in order to keep pushing how far can we actually take this, and how can we make all these decisions in our life a lot more efficient but effective, and then being able to then teach that to general population at any level.
Excellent.
No, that's awesome. And Ashley, we have a couple of minutes left, but I do want to, again, world-class talent and world-class production on your content, on your channel, on Muscle and Fitness Plus. And I can't tell you the value that you add. So we're very thankful for you taking the time. And of course, again, another world-class shout out and a thank you to Fisher 5 Video and Photography. Check them out, Instagram at Fisher, the number 5 Video, and their Facebook page, Fisher 5 Video and Photography. And if you need an example of what their work looks like, go to Muscle Fitness Plus and check out Ashley's channel, Uplift Yourself with Ashley. You guys were awesome. And make sure you, Ashley, Instagram and John, website information, Instagram, social media. Ashley?
Thank you. Oh,
Yeah.
What is mine? It's UP_LIFT_gym.
Okay. And John?
It's J Quint NMT.
Okay. Thank you very much, John and Ashley. I will hopefully see you soon. Ashley, I'll definitely see you soon. Very excited, and thank you for joining us at the A4M conference. As we always say every week, this show is about education and raising awareness. You've added a great value to this show. I can't thank you enough. Have a great day. Thank you. We appreciate it too. In closing, Christian and Linda, we have a business tip of the week by TRM. Trainer Revenue Multiplier. So
Okay.
think quick. Linda, business tip of the week.
I get to go first.
You get to go first.
I would say my business tip of the week would be to build visibility in your community by joining a chamber of commerce or writing for a local publication and just getting involved in a group where people that you want to work with can see you.
Awesome.
My tip is networking, right? And that's building relationships with people who are the big fish in the community, and also people who either just show promise or invest in your abilities in some way, shape, or form. I can't tell you how many opportunities I've come across just by getting to know people. And especially the times when you have opportunities and you're like, oh, I don't really want to go. I could stay home and watch TV, or I could go out and eat.
Yep.
Say yes to everything in the beginning, because you never know who you're going to meet and who they will lead you to.
Heard it all right here. Thank you very much for joining us. Make sure you check us all out. Linda, Instagram.
At Linda Stevens Fit, STEPHENS.
Christian.
At Christian F. Palmer.
At Rob Fletcher Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you check out the Muscle and Fitness Plus channel. Follow John Quint, Ashley Quint. Wealth of information, and they truly love what they do, passionate and extremely knowledgeable. Until next time.